And welcome all to the Vote Common Good Daily Podcast. It's Friday, April 16th, which means on Fridays we get to talk science. And we get to talk today with astrophysicist Paul Wallace, the Every Other Friday co-host. And I'll tell you, I get excited about this. I'm Doug Pagitt from Minneapolis, sitting down today. And Paul Wallace, I have been haranguing you for 4 years. I've counted on my own calendar about why the moon and going to the moon matters. And we're going to talk about that today because as I am loath to ever do, I am thankful for Donald Trump and the Trump administration.
You heard it today, folks. You heard him say it.
Full stop.
Wow.
Somehow the one thing that I find admirable and right about what that administration did was to accelerate interest in space and to the moon. I have all kinds of bad thoughts about the Space Force.
I'm about to say, you're not talking about Space Force here. Yeah.
It was just showed how bumbling they were. But the idea that they said, let's accelerate NASA's plan to go to the moon from 2028, which you and I had talked about 4 years ago, I think, and 2028 felt forever off. And they accelerated it up to 2024, and they were saying, hey, we are going to make this a priority of the United States federal government and NASA. And that's a great thing. So I now have amended my statements that there was nothing for which I was thankful for the Trump administration.
You look hard enough, you'll find something.
If you keep looking, and that's I guess that's the project of science. All right. So I interrupted your brief introduction. You are not only in your hometown, but you're in a different place than you are normally. Why don't you give us a little update?
Yeah, I'm actually normally I've been doing this from home. But today I am at Agnes Scott College in my office in the Science Center right here on the first floor in my little office where I teach physics and astronomy to women. It's a women's college. And so I teach a lot of women, future scientists, future medical professionals, physics.
And you as an astrophysicist, I'm sure, are inspiring young physics majors and dreamers about space. One of the things that I have often felt is that NASA and space for a long time felt like a very male issue and industry, but also kind of an older person's thing, right? And
anymore,
Yeah, and that seems like it changes. Like I see, Target sells a NASA shirt. So, it's got that sort of Target chic kind of vibe to it. But it also feels like there's a thing going on, right? Where there's a bit of an uptick in the space exploration and space life. And I don't know why I'm so enthralled by it. Maybe it's history. I just feel like a perspective of life on this planet is enhanced by getting outside of it and having this.
That is certainly true. That is certainly true. And I really think that's one of the great, powerful benefits of thinking beyond our planet, of going to the moon, of going to Mars. It is simply, you've heard the astronauts talk about viewing the Earth from the moon in sort of this quasi-religious kind of language. But I really do believe there's an essential and important truth to what they're getting at, which is that when you can step back and turn around and see ourselves as living on this planet among others within the vastness of the cosmos, it really actually does change your perspective on the significance and meaning of human life.
So it was 50 years ago, thereabouts, when the United States landed people on the moon, and they took the step, if you believe in such stories. And so it has been around almost to the point that it's become like an old story, right? That that rarely do now all the attention is on Mars. Not that it wasn't on Mars way back, because the notion of Mars and Martians and visitors from there. Certainly was a big deal. Do you feel like the role of getting out of the orbit of Earth, which you should probably correct me, because I feel like the moon's not out of the orbit of Earth. Is that right?
It's really not. It's really not. In fact, from some perspectives, the Earth and Moon are just like two members of the same system. You know, basically, we share the orbit with the Moon.
Like right with each other. How far do you have to go past the moon to be out of the orbit of the Earth? Well, like to be out of?
I don't know, maybe 10 times.
Long way.
To be really clear of probably even more than that. I don't know. I don't really. There's really no definition of what the orbit of the Earth means.
Good. That makes me feel better, because I know we've talked about this some other times on other broadcasts, and you tried to explain to me how gravity and orbits work, and I still really don't. I can't really wrap my head around that. So, I don't know. Maybe a student at your college could explain it to me someday, but I can't really wrap my head around it. But there's this thing that feels like it's going to inspire humanity to be better human beings, and I don't want you to have to traffic over into the social sciences side of this. But as a person who works in your field, can you just talk a bit about that part of it? If we're going to pursue like common good life here, why getting out of here and looking back seems like a good thing?
Yeah, it's kind of like, I've got a friend who teaches at the college here with me, a colleague and a friend, and she is constantly going to Europe. She's got a lot of friends there. Basically, when the college is not in session, whether it's, over the holidays, around Christmas and Thanksgiving, or during the summer, she is in Europe, and she's just traveling everywhere. And she just talks about how it makes her really see her own life in America and her own upbringing in America, sort of really clearly. Certain aspects of life, she comes back and says, "Oh, this should be different. This could be better." Or, "Man, look at what I've got here that they don't have in Europe." And it helps you to see your own self and your own place in the world more clearly. And I think that going to Mars, going to other planets, getting out of the Earth's orbit, as you put it, would have that same effect, but on even a more radical depth, a more powerful. And I don't think that's just a thrill for people, for those select few who get to do it. I think that it's something that would have a deep long-term payoff for everybody.
All right, so let's talk a bit about what the project is. So Artemis is the new NASA project. CNN a couple of days ago ran a nice little segment on this that we'll show here in a minute, a little interview and some some graphics for those who are watching on the video side of this. They'll be able to see this. But can you, as much as you know about it, can you talk about what Artemis is and how this is different than flying a rocket 50 years ago and someone getting off?
Yeah, when they went 50 years ago, their only goal was to go set foot, do some exploration, and return, bring some rocks back, just to see what they could find, sort of frontiers sort of people. But now I think the plan is to go and to stay longer term, to have a constant presence on the moon, in the same way that we have a constant presence on the space shuttle, on the space station now, to have a constant presence there, and to think long term about using that as sort of a base camp to get on to Mars. So it's a much more of a longer term commitment and less of a one-off kind of visit.
One of the things that drove the space race in the 1960s, 1970s was the competition between Russia as an emerging global power and the United States. And so Sputnik was one of their races. And I think Russia actually got the first cosmonauts into space first. Yeah. And
they were also the first to land something on another planet. They landed on Venus. That was the first planet visited. Yes, the first probe to land on a planet other than the Earth was Venera 7, Venera 8, and I think in 1972 or 3, they landed on Venus, not Mars. And it was
Were
the
they trying to
Soviets.
land on Venus? They were trying to land on Venus. It
Yeah,
wasn't a
yeah,
Mars.
yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, they were successful.
Okay. Well, I want to look that up. That's fascinating. I bet that
Venera,
was big.
Venera. Yeah.
I bet there were Russians who are like, yeah, American, we landed on another
Oh
planet
yeah.
first.
Oh yeah.
Bet they'll brag about that. But that was all about like competition. And it
Exactly.
feels like there's this different moment here, which is a little less, hey, let's show our technical dominance as one country over another and do a moonshot project, into something that feels a little different. But what's also different now is that it's become commercial partnered, right? With the U.S. companies, but I'm imagining China-based companies and others that are doing that. I know we've talked about this before, and you have some thoughts about that. But how do you feel about this idea that there's commercial enterprises? You know, Jeff Bezos, and I think Elon Musk. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know enough about it to have a clear opinion on if I think it's a good move or not. My reflexive response is that's not a good thing, because once you start putting profit motives and this sort of thing on this, if they begin to see this as some sort of money-making venture, I immediately get skeptical. But I don't know enough about it to say if that's a good thing or not. With any, I mean, yeah, I'm in astronomy and physics, astrophysics, but I don't know enough about that to have an opinion, I think, that would be different than pretty much any other person who's sort of a space junkie.
I've heard that one of the concerns is that companies like SpaceX and Blue Moon or whatever Bezos is and others, that they're hiring away all the very best people who should be working for the government, for the sort of U.S. collective effort, and they're being siphoned off for the others. Is that a thing you hear at all about? Is that anything that for people who?
No, I'm not surprised to hear it, but I wouldn't think that. I mean, if they're all on the same team, then I mean, yeah, I think we need to have good people in the government in NASA. I really do, and I do think that's a loss if it's coming down to that. I do think that's a loss for NASA itself. But for the bigger picture, I would think that if we're actually all on the same team, then we're all working together.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at the CNN bit, because it describes some of what Artemis is and why they're doing it the way they are and what the plan is. So here's a little piece that describes what Paul and I are talking about.
Nearly 50 years after humans first set foot on the moon,
that's one small step for man.
NASA is planning to go back, this time to stay.
We're going to prove how to live and work on another world, and then take all of that knowledge to Mars. That's the goal.
Dubbed Artemis for Apollo's twin sister, NASA hopes to send a woman this time. The space agency originally planned a lunar landing for 2028, but in March, the Trump administration moved the deadline up by 4 years.
Were you blindsided at all by the new timeline?
Not at all. No, we have the opportunity to do this. A lot of things have to go right. I'm not saying that there's no risk here, but it can be done. It's good for our country. It's got NASA moving in a very serious way.
NASA has already spent years working on a new rocket booster and a crew capsule for the mission. Once beyond Earth's orbit, astronauts will dock with a small space station. Lunar landers, built by commercial partners like Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, will carry astronauts back and forth from the moon. There's still a lot to work out, but the biggest obstacle probably isn't technology.
As the saying goes, it's not rocket science that's the hard part, it's political science, convincing the politicians that they need to fund this adequately. Whatever it is that you think it might cost, it's probably actually going to be more.
NASA estimates total cost could hit $30 billion over 5 years. So far, the White House has only asked for an additional $1.6 billion, but it wants that money to come from the federal Pell Grant program.
I think that proposed source of funding is a non-starter for many people. Quite frankly, I was scratching my head, as were many other people. If we're going back to the moon, Mars, and beyond, we're going to need more rocket scientists, not fewer.
What do you think it's going to take to get that bipartisan support, and also to get the American public jazzed about going back to the moon?
I think when it comes to science, there's not partisanship in Congress. When it comes to exploration, there's not partisanship in Congress. You walk around this agency, you talk to scientists and engineers, they can tell you exactly where they were when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon July 20th, 1969. I'm the first NASA administrator that was not alive. I don't have that memory. I'll tell you what I do remember. I remember where I was in 5th grade, Miss Powers' class, when Challenger exploded. The whole world was watching. Krista McAuliffe, the first teacher in space, was on the mission. So all teachers were interested. I'm sorry I'm getting a little emotional here, but the reality is that's my kind of moment where I know exactly where I was. I want to be clear. Shuttles, amazing program. International Space Station, amazing program. But I don't remember where I was on each one of those launches. I remember where I was on that day. We need to do these stunning achievements to inspire the next generation.
50 years ago, the Apollo 11 mission changed the world. Now, the Artemis program could inspire a whole new generation.
So I think that's pretty cool. Like this idea of the NASA administrator saying we need a stunning display of scientific accomplishment, because as we've talked about so often, for so many people, science feels like a world that they can't understand. They don't trust sometimes, or they don't know how it works, and they can pull it. But boy, you do something grand like this, and it involves human beings and something in the sky you look up at. Man, it just feels like it's going to be a boon for a science revolution to get into the parts of society that we really need it to be. Were you struck by anything else in that little piece?
Yeah, he talked about what was it he said? We do need a sort of a grand thing like this. What I think is that I really do think that it was the competition with the Soviets, with a clear opponent, that made the moon landing in 1969 possible. And I really do think that to get, as he said, to get the people excited, to get the average person on the street, and I'm not sure there's not partisanship. I didn't, I thought when there was a pandemic, I thought, okay, this will do it. This will not be partisan.
Oh, I see.
Because it's a freaking pandemic, right?
Yeah.
But no,
it's everybody. Yeah.
So I think that I am skeptical about that. But beyond that, I do think, to get back to my original point, that we do need to have to I mean, it's got, Doug, it's to motivate the average person on the street. It's got to be simple. It's got to be clear. It's got to be so obvious that this is what we have to, that this is, I mean, I'm sure there were skeptics back in 1965, 66.
Right.
But I really do think we need an absolutely clear rationale.
I think I remember Kennedy, one of the famous Kennedy speeches, where he said, we included the moon in a long list, and he said, we don't do these things because they're easy. We do them because they're hard. Yeah. And he was trying to, gin up a sensibility in the United States in a curious time in our history to solve for something, right? We'd come out of a war. There was all kinds of race conflict that was, we're still in the Jim Crow period. There was all kinds of disagreement and segregation and separation. Yeah. And he was trying to push, the country, and then use the notion of beating Russia.
Maybe it could work again, and maybe those days were more complicated than I have in my mind. Than I have, maybe there were people who didn't care or thought it was a bunch of nonsense. And maybe it would be just the thing to, get us out of this crap that we're in. Maybe it would really help to do that.
Yeah, a real sense
to start thinking.
A real sense of us. It was curious that one of the guests on the piece there, and if you're just listening on the audio, it may have been harder to distinguish the voices, but there was a person named Laura Forsych, and she works with a millennial, what is self-described as a millennial effort of space exploration. So it's young, space interested peoples, and we'll talk more about them on another podcast. But she's in this piece, and she has this great line where she said, getting a permanent space on the moon, you know, whether that's using like a little space station off of it or something more colonized on the moon, is not a rocket science problem. It's a political science problem.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a clever way to phrase that. Like, we know generally what the science would be.
Yeah.
The technical science.
Yeah.
But
scientific problems tend to get solved once they're funded. But it's the getting
yeah, that's so interesting, because I guess my impression is that, boy, if you stir up enough interest, that would get the funding. But you're sort of saying, well, actually, once they get funded and there's an accomplishment, then everybody comes around and recognizes that.
Yeah, it really is a push me, pull me kind of thing. Yeah, but I do think that if a scientific problem gets the funding it needs, it will get solved. Now, I do think that there are
pandemic, didn't we? Yeah.
yeah,
right.
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
right. We all said, hey, let's solve for this, and then everyone in the world got busy. And
yep, that's true.
3, 4,
you know,
5
I had my second shot almost 2 weeks ago, and you know, I was very grateful for all those people who got up out of bed every day and worked together to solve that problem, because that was not easy, and it was done in record speed, and that thing has been so tested. Those magazines have been so well tested over such a short amount of time. People really busted their butts to provide that, and it could happen for this.
I guess it's something from a moon shot to a vaccine shot, right? This arm shot that we got. But I feel like you were saying something else there when I interrupted you with the coronavirus.
Do you remember what it was?
No, I don't remember. Hey, but Kendra Horn was on there. And for those who also dip into our Tuesday conversations about politics, Kendra Horn is one of the candidates that we've worked with. I'm a big fan of Kendra Horn. And she brought up the fact that one of the ways the Trump administration wanted to fund this, I feel like I just need to balance the, my kind thoughts for the man's accomplishment. Very short-lived, less than 20 minutes, and here I go.
Yeah. But it's on tape. It's we got it.
Yeah, we're gonna cut and loop that. That's gonna become a personal meme. The idea that the way that where they want to get the initial money for Artemis is from the Pell Grant funding, which, if you don't know Pell Grant, it's been around since Senator Pell pushed for there to be public funding for middle and low income people to go to college as a grant and not a loan. It's how I went to college, on the Pell Grant. Still how millions of people can access college. It takes the first big chunk of your college costs and says, we're going to spread that out over the federal budget, and we want you to go to college. They want to raise the Pell Grant. The Pell Grant.
When I heard that, I thought, when I first heard her say that, I thought, oh, there must be some other part of the Pell Grant thing that's not what I think it is. Like some bigger operation. But no. Sounds like they really are talking about that program that has been so successful for so long.
Which, again, it just makes you say, well done, Trump administration. Yeah, let's go to the moon. Let's do that. But let's fund this like out of corporate taxes, or better yet, just government spending that doesn't have to be paid for, like all the other big tax breaks that people give, or just out of the military budget. How about if we go take it out of the military budget? Because the notion that $30 billion will be spent on this over 5 years, that's $6 billion a year, which is to most of our bank accounts, a lot of money.
Yeah.
But I think that's even less money than Jeff Bezos has, right? So it's like, Bezos could fund that thing.
Bezos could fund it. Yeah.
It's not a lot of money. Like, if they're serious that this is going to be a $30 billion or $100 billion, just to remind us, on our every other week conversations on Friday when we talk economics, the government operates in trillions of dollars and spending sometimes trillions of dollars in one fiscal year. So the idea that you're going to spend, and I think $300 billion is spent on the military. So all of that to say, it's not an enormous amount of money for a country our size with our GDP. It's actually
the
quite
Pentagon budget's in the $700-800 billion range, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, it's way
every
up
year.
there. Yeah, every year.
For, you know, and if people want to talk about stuff that's not being used in any, you know, there's a lot of that's just equipment that's obviously paying American workers and other workers around the world to build and create. So it's an economic generator. Yes. But it's not being used in anything functional. Why don't we take a lot of that effort, a lot of that money, and do some humankind exploration and get ourselves moving? So I want to talk about this, you know, ongoing, because I think that people power is ultimately what makes all of this happen, right? You have to have the right scientists, you have the right politicians, you have to have the right people who really do care about it and start talking about going to the moon, that it's not some little project that we finished 50 years ago. In my little brain, the Suez Canal and going to the moon sort of sit right next to each other, right? I don't know. Like when I was a kid, these were great accomplishments. Like they cut a canal across that part of, you know, Africa, and then
that canal is amazing. Yeah, actually,
it's amazing. It's an amazing
incredible
feat of engineering, as was the moon launch. You know, and then that's where that big tanker ship got stuck in that thing because it got you know, got sideways on a sandbar.
Yeah.
And created all that problem. But all that to say, look, we don't look at the moon, can evangelize for a minute, friends, don't look at the moon as, oh, that's no big deal. And I know that for you, it's more going to Mars. The purpose of a location on the moon is not because we've run out of space in Montana to, you know, put a housing development. It's really a functional purpose to do something even more grand. That's part of what Artemis is about. Do you want to say a little bit about how that all works from a physicist, astrophysicist perspective?
How what works exactly? Say it again.
Why having a space on the moon?
A
long-term, you know, not just space station out there, but some kind of a station.
Yeah, sort of a base camp, like I said before.
Yeah. Why is that necessary?
There's several good reasons for it. Probably the biggest one is that launching from the moon is far less expensive than launching from Earth. Of course, you have to launch from the Earth to get to the moon. But as far as a regular routine practice goes, the gravity of the moon is 1/6 that of the Earth. So you just don't have to get as much, you don't have to get going as fast. You don't need as much power. You don't need as much fuel. You don't need as much, and, you know, weight is not, you know, as much of a problem. It's just a whole lot cheaper, buttloads cheaper to launch from the moon than it is to launch from the Earth.
Now that should have been self-evident, but that was not clear to me. So you're saying that part of the reason, if they make us a launch station on the moon, that can involve a set of technologies that are more sustainable and doable.
Yeah,
does it mean
fiscally sustainable.
Does it mean we could get there faster, or it just means it seems like the other issues of like having to work in like moon space where stuff's floating around would be harder than working here on the Earth.
Well, it would certainly be less intuitive. It'd be less intuitive, but things don't float around. You know, I think that they fall to the moon. They just fall a lot slower. You know, it looks like slow motion when you drop a ball on the moon. It still falls. It just falls at, you know, 1/6 the rate, approximately.
So that would so that would help. Things would
it would help. It just makes the per launch cost a lot less. And it makes it makes frequent launches to Mars would be, you know, if we're going to be doing this regularly, it'd be a bigger cost up front, of course. It'd be a lot of investment, but in the long term, over decades, it would pay off to have a launch pad on the moon.
As hard as it is for somebody to conceive why we would do any kind of permanent space launch base camp on the moon, I want to give a sentence or two about why having people on Mars, which seems very uninhabitable from what, you know, you sort of see from the rover and all that. Why do we want that? What's the upside of that?
the only answer is the same answer that was it Hillary who said, when they showed him Mount Everest, why are you climbing that mountain? And he said, well, because it's there. It's like, try to stop me, that sounds trivial. That sounds trivial when I say it like that.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, the truth is that somebody's going to eventually do it.
I see.
Somebody is eventually going to do it. And maybe the question that, the government ought to present to the country is, do you want it to be us or do you want it to be China? Who do you want to be the first one to Mars?
Yeah. And all that goes with that, I guess, right? All the technology, all the learnings, all the experiences that go with making this happen. I'm sure someone has documented, I'm betting there's a Wikipedia page that would list the many advances that we take for granted now that likely wouldn't have been available to us had we not gone to the moon or even done the shuttle or done the space station, or because you see these little experiments that people do. And sometimes, if you're just a casual reader of, a news headline, you're like, why do we care about the slugs experience, on the moon? But that's all a part of some deeper understanding about how things work.
Exactly.
Because as you've reminded me before, as much as we know and as much as we can accomplish, the spectrum of what we don't know and that we don't even know we don't know is endless, right? It's sort of massive.
Yeah.
And this is all.
One of the issues is gravity. It's like, we have never, we take gravity for granted, right? It's always there. We can't turn it off. It's even on the weekends, right? It's always there. So we don't know what happens when we turn it off because we've never experienced it. And so we have to know all this stuff because a trip to Mars, 4 months, 6 months to Mars, it ain't the same as going to the moon. It is a whole different thing. It is qualitatively different. One thing to be, out in space for a week, 10 days. Another thing to be out in space for years.
Yeah. Like a lifetime, like to spend your lifetime in that kind of an environment.
Or at least large segments of your life. Yeah.
Is there any downside that you've ever heard? I see Celeste write something in the comments here that says, you mean going to our moon, the one the Earth depends on? Just for people who might be concerned, is there anything to worry about with putting things on the moon, shooting rockets off of the moon, short of space clutter up there? Is there anything?
Space junk is already a big problem. I think one issue with the moon, in particular with Mars, is that we don't want to take a whole lot. It's colonization.
Yeah.
But we say, oh, it's not because there's no people there. But when we show up, we bring our bacteria with us. And so, there will be life on Mars.
Isn't that
whether it survives or not, I don't know. But even if we go and come back, there will be something on Mars. And so that's an issue. And there's ethics around that. Because, I see these pictures of Mars and it just is stunning. You think that the desert in southwestern United States is desolate and untouched. Nothing has touched this for billions of years.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about going. And I think there's some ethical questions around that. And quite frankly, we need to get our philosophers, our religious leaders, certain ones, to weigh in on this, because I think there are ethical and religious and spiritual issues to address.
Yeah, and it's a mind bender, right? We've talked before about sometimes in sort of flippant, joking terms about the people who don't believe we landed on the moon or the flat earthers or whatever. But it bends people's minds. The conspiracy theories are often rooted out of someone's just stunned disbelief. They
Yeah.
can't quite imagine.
Incredulity. Incredulity. Yes.
Incredulity.
Incredulity.
That's a sign that something doesn't sit right with people. And there's just an awful lot of people who I think quietly, they don't have a very well-developed sense of all this, but they just kind of look up and they think, oh, seriously? Like, we're going to put people up there? That just feels, it feels absurd, that we're going to do this. And I happen to think that's part of the human progress, right? That human beings should be looking for these magical, extreme, stunning, absurd kinds of accomplishments. That's better than that pulls us forward somehow. But I also understand like that's a certain perspective that not everybody holds. And I really hope that people will take on that opinion. Actually, I think it's one worth sort of propagating and saying to people, hey, there's something really great that humanity can do. Like we get up close to ourselves and recognize the difficulties and the pains and the treatment of one another and the way of human behavior that is heart-wrenching and heartbreaking and that needs to be changed. And you sort of need that. You need that beautiful sunrise. You need that glimpse of another possibility. Like it's part
of a new possibility.
It should be in there with like art and music and lovemaking.
That's exactly how I see it. That's fundamentally how I see it.
Yeah,
I see it as one of these just human needs, human drives, and I don't think it will do to just sort of resist it and tamp it back down.
Mm-hmm.
I think it does. We do much better when we encourage it, but also encourage I guess good behavior, in the sense of doing it with a conscience. We can do it. Somebody's going to do it.
Yeah. Will
it be the United States in this century? Could be another country in this century. I don't know. It could be next.
Wow.
I don't. I mean, Mars is a problem. Mars is a hard problem.
Do you think we'll get to the moon by 2024? Do you have a?
No. I think it's I think.
I think it's only because Donald Trump wanted us to go by 2024. Is that all this is? Are you just? Why don't you think we'll get there by 2024?
Well, I'll tell you why. It's not because I'm a cynic about the scientists and about the engineers. If there was ever an optimistic, we can do a group of people, it's got to be engineers. I come from a family of these people. I'm like the black sheep. I'm like the pessimist in our family. But I love these people because they're so optimistic. They can solve the problem. They can do it. My question is the political will. That's my question. They said they threw what 1.6 billion at it. That's what the White House requested for it.
Yeah,
it's a $30 billion $30 billion program over 4 years, a few years, and they're putting up 1.8 billion.
Yeah,
and they're going to get the Pell Grant to do it. I don't know. Political will to me is that's where my cynicism comes in.
Well, maybe we could start a GoFundMe, like GoFundMe to the moon project. Those things seem to take off, small fundraisers.
Hey, we got $1,500.
Yeah, hey, can everybody chip in? I want to go on the next moon adventure.
Everybody chips, everybody who makes $100,000 or more a year chipping $1,000. That'd be a lot of money.
That'd be a lot of money. It's called taxes. People do that, especially if you get the wealthiest people to do it. Or better yet, as I like to say, just make it an investment from the federal government, and that's how that works. I saw a TV commercial the other day for a diabetes blood sugar measurement, and the phrase started, "We can go all the way to Mars, and people still have to prick their finger to find out their numbers," and it kind of struck me that like, oh, we've incorporated now right into our popular culture these accomplishments that we've sort of been there and done that thing, which I was like, okay, that's good that's in the parlance, right? It's there because the Challenger blowing up when I was in college, that was a real setback. And then lots of failures in NASA, and I feel like there was a period of time where NASA was just sort of finding its
Sort of a
floating
come to Jesus moment.
Yeah, they were floating, like falling slowly to the moon. But it feels like, boy, no, NASA is back. Like, it's going to do something great. And it's curious to me that every news story that I hear about going to Mars or the moon, it's got to include Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and these private industries, because I know they play a significant role. But if there's going to be a common good approach to science, it feels like these big kinds of projects need to be incorporated into the human endeavor as something that's really good for all of us, and to start sporting this in the conversations of people who normally wouldn't be part of it, I think would be great. Like, astrophysicists like you in the world. Yeah.
I think if we can get it into, like you said, it's in that advertisement. If we can get it into the average person's mind, but I still think it's going to require like the Chinese are a competition thing with the Chinese. I think that's the way to go, but they need to, it's sort of like the Russian Sputnik, the Chinese need to land on the moon or something and walk around to get us like, oh, we better do that. You know what I mean? I don't know what that has to happen, but something like that.
Have we had a foot, as humanity had a foot on the moon recently? When was the last time somebody was walking?
1973?
Really?
Maybe when I was 5. Yeah.
Is that because we never actually landed?
Maybe
there?
72, but maybe 70. I mean, we've landed now. What's been great over the last 20 years, and I've said this on this podcast before, is a solar system exploration, non-human sort of robotic. That has been phenomenal over the last 20, 30.
And the
crushing
space station. Space station. I think that's a big deal. I don't really know what they do on the space station, but they've been up there a long time. There's always somebody living out there. I'm not, still looking for a little update. How's that going?
A lot of gravity experiments. That's a lot of what they're doing.
It's gravity experiments. Mm-hmm.
What happens when we turn gravity off? That's
I remember. One of the senators from Arizona is Mark Kelly, and he's a former astronaut, and his brother is a twin brother, and he was an astronaut. So I think they used like that other brother and sent him up there to live for a year or something on the space station. And then they're comparing their effects on their body to see if they can tell what would be affected, because they've got a twin that they can compare it to, which is also like just perfectly fantastic. Like, seriously, you got these twins that want to both be astronauts and that they are. Well, Paul, thanks for pulling our hopes up to the sky for a minute to do what humanity has done, which is to look to the skies and say, it is very good. So it's
always good to chat with you, Doug. It's always good.
Thank you, buddy. Hey, join us, friends, daily for the podcast. On Mondays, news. Tuesdays, politics. Wednesdays, faith. Thursdays, we talk about issues that really matter in our world. And on Fridays, it's science and economics. So glad to have you part of this. If you're not already part of the podcast, head over to votecommon.good.com/podcast. And if you're only listening on the podcast, thank you. See us live sometime, looking at each other from basements and bedrooms and offices and all the rest. And head over to votecommon.good.com, sign up for all that, find all those things, much of what else we have to offer, including a Tuesday night webinar on the threat and dangers of white Christian nationalism. We'll have episode 3 of that 4-part series this coming Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Time, or it stays in our feed and will also be in your podcast stream, those pieces. So we'd love to have you connect to all that, and head over to Vote Common Good, sign up for our email list, would you? And as I like to remind you, don't miss the donate button when you're over there. Give a little something to, keep us talking about the moon. We'd love that. So best to you, Paul. Thank you, Dan Dietrich. As we do, on this podcast about every Friday, we remind you that this is brought to you by our large staff here at Vote Common Good, like they do on This American Life. I'll list off all the names of the people who make this happen today: Paul Wallace, Doug Pagitt, Daniel Dietrich. That's it. Sometimes we throw in a Stephanie Spaulding and a Laura Truax and Rob Ryersey and so on, but just small little group of us that do this. So the credits don't take long. But all the credit to all the people who make all this happen. So thanks for being a part of it, y'all. Talk to you in a bit.